was discussed in the original webinar, or anything that you have questions on and things like that. So I'm happy to discuss that information with you all today. So a couple things before we get started. Just like with the webinar that you watched before, all of today's data is fictitious and made up. If you happen to notice anything that kind of resembles what you may have seen, or that is something you may recognize, that's just purely coincidental. We are running as though we're January 20th of 2025. So we're going to pretend that that's today's date. As you heard me say earlier, the session is being recorded, so just be aware that that is going on. And then also, we are running on an outdated version of the system. Back in December, we did what's called freezing this particular training side of the system. And what that means is that back in December, we made sure that things were stable enough so that I could put data in and we can run the data. But that does also mean that there have been a lot of updates that have happened in the past 2 months that are not part of this particular system. And service providers is one thing that has had a number of different changes. The majority of things will flow, and navigation will work very similar and things like that, but you will have some additional permissions, so some changed accesses, things like that, that I'll make sure to try and highlight when we are going over this training today. Okay. So that being said, I'm going to go ahead and jump in. I will say, because we have a good amount of time scheduled for this morning, you're welcome to stop me and ask questions. I have enabled your mics. If you would prefer to ask questions over microphone, you're welcome to do so. I would say if you could use the raise your hand function, if you have that ability, that would help me out so that I can give a pause and allow you to ask your question. And make it a little bit easier there. You're also welcome to post your question in chat, and Adam Blair and Paul Gibson will be happy to help answering your questions today. We also have Lakeisha Snow here with us today, who works for the Motor Carrier Unit, and she can help with answering some questions if needed. She's also going to be learning a little bit about the side of things, so she may not have all the answers. And that leads me to my final thing. Adam and Paul and myself are all contractors with the state. So we cannot answer questions specifically with like business process, procedure, or answer questions on behalf of the state, but we can talk about the mechanics of how things will work and how the MyDMV will work for you all. Okay. All right. So with all that being said, we'll go ahead and jump in with this main page here. Now, for you all, oops, that's not what I want. There we go. For you all, service providers will not have to go through that pre-registration piece that is already going to be set up in the system, and you will have, we'll be manually doing that in the system. But I do think it's important that with your clients, you may want to or need to assist them in doing the registration. So since we're here on the registration piece, I want to just reemphasize and kind of go over what that is going to look like for your clients. And if you need to, you can help walk them through certain things if needed. So we are on the MyDMV for IFTA IRP main page, and we have the register new customer and register existing customer. Remember that new customer is for brand new customers that do not currently have an account in the state of Alabama, whereas existing customers currently do have an account in the state of Alabama, and that will be transferring over with us when we move from AMC to MyDMV. Okay. And just as a reminder, when you go to register existing customer, it's going to bring up this page here, and you'll be required to fill out some business information and some user information. They'll have to verify that they're not a robot. So if you've done any of those CAPTCHAs before where you have to identify, you like check the box or identify, what are stairs, things like that, it should show there. And let me, I just realized I am not actually showing you my screen. Let me do that for y'all. How's that? Is that a lot better for y'all? Wonderful. I'm glad. All right, so here is um, the My DMV for IFTA IRP. We'll go to the register existing customer, and let me double check. All right, and then they'll have to fill out the CAPTCHA like I was saying, and then they'll click on next. And then we'll be asking them questions about their current existing customer information. So are they sole proprietor? Do they have an IFTA and our IRP account? That information there. One thing that's important to note is that our system is dynamic, meaning that as they answer questions, things may change. For example, if I say yes, that I am a sole proprietor, the fields will change so that it's first name, middle name, last name rather than business name, because it recognizes by answering that question, you're not going to be providing a business name, you're going to be providing the individual's name. They still do have the option for the DBA or doing business as um, under that they can select as well. I'm going to change this back to no. Um, they will need their client ID. They will need their USDOT, and they will need their FEIN. The client ID is the current client ID that they have today, just to be clear. If they do not have their FEIN, then you can click on the checkbox here, and we assume that they then have an SSN that they would use. Okay. Once they progress past this page, we're going to do an initial check to make sure. Then they would go in and create the logon information. We'll talk a little bit more about logons later on, and it's the exact same from the webinar that was done last week, but we'll do a refreshing on that as well. So if you need to, or if you end up getting questions from clients, they can you can answer that for them. Yes, I see we have a question. If I select yes, that's a good question. So the question is, for assisting clients in pre-registration, if they select yes for the service provider, what does that look like? If I click the yes here, and then it's going to provide a service provider box, we would enter in that service provider information here. So if there's a service provider, they just fill that information out once they select that. Now, I will say that if they are a new customer, as a new to the state of Alabama, there's a drop-down list where they would actually select the service provider that they choose, and when they go through that process, they will be required to have a power of attorney. We'll walk through also updating a current customer, because they will need they may need to do this if they don't originally have you as a service provider. So you can see what it's like to walk through and add a service provider, and then needing like a power of attorney or something like that. Okay. So they finish filling out their business information, then they would need to create a logon. Remember, with the logon, they can either use like their email address, which is going to be the easiest in terms of making sure they have a logon name that is unique. But they can also create their own logon name if needed. So if they want to make it shorter or whatever they would want it to be, they have that option. But if it is taken by something or someone else, they would not be able to do so. All right. And I apologize if I don't get the name quite right. Is that does that answer your questions, Relia? Great. Okay. Going to go back to the home page, and I'll say yes to go back to that home page, and then I'll register my new customer here just to give you a reminder of what that looks like. To start out with, we have this information here that we'll be needing to provide. We'll click next. And then just like before, it'll ask us questions. It is going to break things up a little bit more, and then kind of segment things to hopefully make it a little bit easier to answer the questions. So we have, are you sole proprietor or registered to only, and have that information here. And then we have sections for like IFTA specific and IRP specific, and then we'll have additional sections throughout. Again, they'll set up their username and logon information so that they can get it sent an email for that. And they will be able to select if they have a service provider with this current process when they are registering. Um, One thing to note is that as they are walking through the process, shoot, what was I going to say? They will need to they'll need to have all their documentation and upload that as they're going through it. This will include the power of attorney. So all of that will be done all at once as they're doing that. Okay, we're going to go ahead and go back. Um, Lori asked to make sure I understand correctly, clients who have pre-registered will not need their registration step. Overall, that is correct, Lori. And I say that overall as in if they pre-registered and then something was not correct on their pre-registration, and MVD reviewed and found that something was not correct. They tried to get a hold of them, and that was not done before we roll out. Then they will not be approved for that pre-registration, and they'll wait for that. But um, yes, that is the goal there. Of course, happy to help out. Good question. Okay, another thing that might be useful or helpful for your clients is if they are registering, like doing the register new customer, for example, they can save draft. So if the customer is filling out all the information and maybe you're helping them or, walking them through some basic things, um, they can save the draft if like they have to go, there's an emergency that happens, or they can't find the paperwork that they need and they don't want to fill everything out again. They can save this draft and come back to it at a later date, um, and they can click on the check saved registration drafts and enter in the email and the confirmation number that was given to them for that draft. So they can kind of put it on hold and it'll sit there in the system. I think it's for 30 days. Adam, if you could correct me if I'm wrong there. Um, and then they can come back to it when they have their documentation. But that way they don't have to re-enter everything. And then they can check their registration status as well. And um, this is like if they have submitted the registration and they're like, hey, I've not heard if I've been approved or yet, or not yet. They have this external ID and email address that they can enter in and get an update on where they're at with that process. Okay. All right. Adam said the pre-register to answer Lori's question also. Adam said the pre-registration link will be in the My DMV for IFTA IRP after rollout as well. So you will have time after rollout to do pre-registration. Great. And thank you. Adam double checked me, and registration drafts are saved for 30 days. Okay, and then for our, so we'll go ahead and do our logon. Remember that if for whatever reason somebody forgets their logon or password, we do have the ability to do a password reset externally or answer some questions, get you your logon information here. So you don't need to call in or submit a ticket for that. You have your own ability to do so. So if I click on the username and I'm going to enter in rzant@test.com, and I'm going to enter in password and log in as our service provider. So our service provider today is Sweet Home Alabama Service Provider. They currently have 2 customers, Midnight Train Trucking and Small Town Trucking. And this is what they will see when they originally or first log on. I'm logging in as the account administrator for Sweet Home Alabama Service Provider. So just kind of keep that in mind because I have those particular permissions. Um, we have the all tab, which is going to show all, and that includes us as a service provider. So the way the system looks at you as a service provider performing activities, you're basically going to select who you're going to be working with and then doing activities on their behalf, coming back out and selecting a new uh, client that you'll be working with, and you would be considered your own client, if you will, and you would be selecting yourself if you needed to perform activities on your own for your own organization. Um, we have the favorites, and I'll talk about favorites a little bit more in just a second. We have our recent. So as you're working with customers or your clients, you'll be able to have a running list of who you've worked with recently. That will hopefully help you bounce like back and forth as needed. If depending on how many clients you have, if you're working with 20, 30, 100 clients, that can get to be a lot. So having a way to quickly get to what you were working with can be helpful. Then we have our Action Center. And this is just like from the webinar, we'll have Action Center, and you'll see information for particular customers. So Midnight Train Trucking has 12 unread letters. Then they have their IFTA specific information where their license requires attention. If we scroll down, we have Small Town Trucking. Their IFTA license also requires attention. We can also see for the IFTA account here that their Q3 and Q4 need to be filed. Okay. Right. Go back to my all. Then also here I have the ability to filter. So if I have a list of 20, 30, 100 customers I'm working with, I can filter through those here. So if I wanted to look for small town trucking out of a list of 100, I could enter in small, and it's going to filter by the word small and bring up any customer that hits with that filter. So it's a way to narrow your list down in a quick and easy way for you. Now let's say that I was working and doing a lot with small town trucking, and I wanted to keep a tab on them, or I just know that they may need some additional attention, or I just want to have them in my back pocket and easy to grab at any time, I can click the Add Favorite hyperlink, and that's going to add them to my favorites. So if I go to the Favorites tab, they will show in that list. So I'm going to remove this filter here so we can see everything. And if I go to Favorites, they are showing up as my favorites. So I can put as many as in my favorites as I want to, but this can help you if you know you're going to be working with a certain client regularly or for a little while. You can add them to your favorites to make it a little bit easier to find them. I see somebody typing questions, so I'm going to give it a moment for that to finish before we move on. Uh, we were asked, we have an IFTA department and an IRP department in our office. Will multiple people be able to be logged in at the same time? Yes, you will be able to. So not only can the clients or carriers have multiple logons, you will also be able to have multiple logons, and those multiple logons will be able to perform actions and activities individually, so they can all be logged in at the same time to perform actions. Good question. Okay. So this is kind of your main dashboard for when you first log in and want to start working with either yourself or your carriers that you are serving. Do you have any questions about this main screen? Oh, there's another question popped up. Is this going to carry over, or will we need to create logons for each department? So to answer that, you will need to create, so the initial account administrator will be created when we create the logon, or when we create your account for my DMV for IFTA IRP. And I think there's some emails that have gone out to confirm who that account administrator should be and what we have on file. If not, Adam and Paul can kind of work with you on that. But that account administrator will then need to go up and set up those individualized logons. Does that answer your question? Of course. Happy to help out. Glad that answered that for you. Okay. Okay. Any other questions on where we are at right now with the the service provider springboard? Okay. Let's go ahead and move a little bit deeper. And we're going to click on the service provider name here to look at the service provider specific account. So we don't currently have any actions for us as a service provider, but if I had any actions that were needed, so and any activities particular to my account that required some action or attention, we would see that here. This would include messages or letters, things like that. If I go to the business management tab, I have the same thing that we had for the carriers. However, we do not have our IFTA and our IRP panels because we don't have our own, as service providers, we don't have our own IFTA and IRP. That's for our individual customers or our individual clients. They'll have that. So we do have submissions where we can search submissions that have been done for this account or for us specifically, Sweet Home Alabama Service Provider. Any letters, and remember letters are typically things that can be printed. So PDFs, for example, would be considered letters, and that will show here. Any messages would also be able to be seen here. We have our main manage payments and returns and request refunds. And then we have access management for managing the logons that we for specifically Sweet Home Alabama service provider, or in your case, your service provider. So this is where you would go to add logons for you as a service provider. Okay.
Nathan, I just want to add on
Yeah.
to this spot here on the business management tab. So on the business management tab for your service provider customer, there will also be an additional menu here. This was added after the environment was frozen, but it's
Gotcha.
a service providers report tab, and it will allow you guys to be able to, if you're an account administrator, you'll be able to see all of the work that users who are tied to this service provider have done across all of your customers. So you'll be able to see what user submitted what supplement on whatever account that they have done that day. Um, and then if you're not an account administrator and you have basic access, you'll be able to see what work you have submitted over the course of the day. That way you can kind of like keep an eye on what work's being done across all of the accounts and customers that you guys work with.
Awesome. Thanks for that addition, Adam. And I noticed we got a little round of applause for that. So sounds like that's a good thing to have, and people are happy about that. So I'm happy for that too. Okay. So let's go ahead and I'm going to go back real quick and just show you. This is what it looks like when you go into your own account. But if I go back to work with somebody else, and let's say I go to small town trucking and I click in, I'm going to be able to see this specific carrier's information. So now I'm working with small town trucking. They're noted as a favorite. And then if I scroll down, we are on their landing page. So we have their specific account information. We have the IFTA account, the IRP account, and we can see that they have a balance or a credit on their IFTA. Their IRP is about to expire next month. Remember, we are pretending that it's January 20th of 2025, and they currently do not have any balance or have a zero balance on their account. Okay. Then we have the Action Center, which is specific to small town trucking and what they have going on with their account. And then if I go to business management, you can see that as business management, I have submissions, letters, payments, and returns. Then the IRP and IFTA reports that we covered in the other webinar. And this is where they would have their cab cards, their tears, their temps, things like that. Okay. And then one thing you'll notice right now is that even though I'm an account administrator, I'm not currently seeing um, the ability to add logons for this customer. And Adam, can you confirm for me, is this going to stay the same, or is this going to um, my understanding is that we are going to give them potential for account administrator access for everyone, but I just want to confirm that with you.
Yeah, so when we roll out that the service provider users will have account administrator access to all of their customers, so they'll be able to add and manage logons for their customers as needed.
Great. Okay. Appreciate that. So that means that you will be able to create logons for both your own organization and you can create logons for your carriers. So, if the carrier has somebody that also needs to access the information, maybe to get their 30-day temps or their cab cards or whatever, or pull information outside of what you're providing for them, you can create those logons and manage those logons for them as well. Okay. So I'm going to go back And we'll go back to the Sweet Home Alabama service provider. We've been talking a lot about logons. There's been questions on that. So let's go ahead now and actually review the add logon process and kind of what that's going to look like for you as a service provider. And then managing the logons for you as a service provider as well. So to begin, I'm going to add a logon. So I'm going to click the add logon hyperlink. Then I'm going to add our first logon. And this is going to be, sorry, I'm pulling up my script because I got lost here. Okay. It's going to be jzant at test.com. Oh, sorry, I'm looking at the wrong one. It should be Perry Stevens. And then this is going to be P. Stevens at test.com for each one of those. And then one thing to note is that as you're setting this up, we do not allow you to copy and paste from the email address to the confirm email address. So if you try and do that and it's not working, that is not a system thing, that is intentional, because we want to make sure that we are actually verifying what was entered in as is correct. Would you like to use the email address as, or the email as the username? If I select yes, it's going to automatically populate that. If I say no, I can change to having my own email address or my own username here, and then it will compare that with the usernames we have currently and either allow that or not. So I'll leave this set as Perry, then I'll click next. Now we have our business access, and this is for the service provider. So we're saying, should this customer be able to have account administrator or basic account access as a service provider to small town trucking and midnight trucking, or just one, or what's the situation that we have there? So to add that access, I'm going to grant access. And right now, there was a change that happened. Um, the we are going to allow for account administrator. Before we were defaulted to basic account access, and the main difference there is the account administrator can add logons like we talked about before. They can also set up and manage ACH or bank account channels and payment channels, so they can set up that information as well. So as of right now, I can't do that, but when we actually roll out, you will be able to select if the user should have account administrator access or basic account access. I'll click the next button. Then we can determine if this user should have specific access to accounts. For example, we have this broken down for each one of the customers to be IFTA IRP for Midnight Train and IRP and IFTA for Small Town Trucking. And I can grant specific access to each one of those individual accounts. Now, if somebody should have all access to all the accounts, we are going to have a link that allows for just one to be selected, and it will do it for everybody. So you won't have to go through, and if you have like 100 accounts, you're not going to have to go to all 100 of them and do it 200 times for IFTA and IRP. But for right now, I'm going to click on Grant Access for the IFTA account for Midnight Train Trucking. And then I have the choice to click on Submit and Pay or View Only. Submit and Pay would be that they can perform actions and activities as though they are to like file the return and then pay for the return if needed for IFTA, or submit supplements and pay for the supplements if it's for IRP. View only means they can only view the information. They cannot actually perform actions or activities. So for example, if I wanted to, if this person is only working for IFTA or doing IFTA stuff, but it would be helpful for them to see IRP. We could say submit and pay and view only, and they would be able to do actions for IFTA, but they would not be able to actually do the actions for IRP. They would still be able to see that information though. We change this back to submit and pay and give them submit and pay for everything. Okay. Now, before I submit this, does anyone have any questions about creating the actual logon? Because that's all that's needed to do it. You just select who they should have the access for, and then you should say select what level or what the account access they should have, submit and pay or view only for each account type. Okay, I'm not seeing any hands or any typing, so I'll go ahead and submit this. This has been submitted. We have our confirmation number. If we needed, we could print that out, and then we can click OK, and we'll be brought back to our main one. Now, if I go to Manage Business Access, we can see that we have the new account that's been created. We have these other accounts that I've also created. And if I needed to manage any one of these accounts, meaning update their permissions, their access, things like that, I would just click into the logon. So I'm going to go to JBoss here. And here I can see if they, what access they actually have. If they've had any activity, there's been no activity for this customer or for this logon. And then I can change access by clicking on the change access hyperlink. And I could change them from an account administrator or basic account access to an account administrator. Can also manage their account access, and oops, it's not the one I wanted. If I click on the manage here, oh, you know what? I know what's going on with this one. Let me go back to JZant. Because this one. So JZant has activity logged on. They had a profile change where they updated their account. And we have the basic account access, account administrator, and I could change that, and then this individual would become the account administrator. Now, if also if you are an account administrator, if somebody, did not set up their account or lost the email for accessing, you can resend the log on access email. You don't need to contact MVD or the motor carrier unit to get that updated for you. Also, one thing, if you remember from the webinar, we will have two-step verification, which means that, or two-factor authentication, also called multi-factor authentication. That means that you will have your account logon and password, and we'll also be doing a verification where you'll have like an authenticator app or a text message or email where you'll get a code sent to you. You use that code to then access the account. If for whatever reason this individual has account access, maybe they got a new phone and their phone number changed, or they lost access with their authenticator app, or whatever the situation is, you would be able to reset their two-step verification for them. They would be able to log on, and then they would just have to reset that up. There was a question that was asked for clarification. There can be multiple account administrators, correct? And the answer is yes. You can have multiple account administrators. Great. Okay. And then finally, if you have somebody that was working for your organization or for whatever reason should no longer have access, you can deactivate the access for that logon as well. And if for whatever reason they were deactivated and then they came back, you can also reactivate that access at a later time. All right, I'll go back to manage the access. Any other questions on logons, creating logons, or managing the logons themselves? Okay, I'm not seeing anything, so we'll go ahead and continue on. All right. So let's go ahead and we'll go into a customer and um, add or yeah, we're going to add a service provider. So let's say that you have somebody, a carrier, they already have an account, and then they want to add a service provider to their account. So we're going to log in as a new, or not a new customer, but a different customer. All right, so now I'm logged in as a carrier. So as you can see, I don't have any of that service provider information, and this um, carrier is not tied to a service provider currently. So they've been doing all of their own stuff, and they have decided they want to add you or add Sweet Home Alabama as their service provider. To do that, they need to make an account update. So from the summary page, we will have this section for the customer level or the customer information where we could update that information. We'll click on the update account hyperlink. And this is where a carrier can update their own information. They have a new FEIN, DBA, or they're adding a DBA, any of those types of things. IRP information, mailing address, IFTA mailing address, IRP mailing address. All of those can be updated here. And depending on what they are updating, we will be asking for like paperwork to be submitted along with it so that it can be reviewed and those updates can take place. Down here we have the service provider, and you currently do not have a service provider on record. And then we ask, would you like to update service provider information? Or service provider will say yes on this. Now, notice that just by clicking yes, it's not going to add anything. We would actually need to click yes, but the user or the carrier can update multiple things at once. So for each one that they check yes, they would be able to update all that information altogether. For right now, we'll do just the service provider. I'll click on the next button. And I know this is a little bit redundant, but the one way to think about it is we're asking, do you want to update your service provider information? And if they already had one, then we would be updating who their current service provider is. Now we're asking, would you like to add the service provider? So we're saying yes. So I know that's a little bit redundant. There's been some back and forth and some discussions on that may be updated. But just know that they're going to have to say yes and then yes if they would like to add a service provider. Then from the drop-down menu here, we would select our service provider, Sweet Home Alabama service provider. And as I mentioned before with the new customer registration, this is also very similar to how it will look and work for adding a new service provider for a brand new customer to Alabama. So if they're adding a service provider, they would have this drop-down list. They would say, yes, they're adding a service provider, yes for this drop-down, and then they would select yes for IFTA and IRP if the service provider was managing both. Then we want to enter in the contact information for the service provider. So we're going to enter in Ron Zant for the contact name, rzant@test.com for the contact email, Phone type will be business phone. Area code 334-555-1234. And then we will click the next button. Once they've entered that information, they're brought to the screen where we need to have them attach a power of attorney. They can either click the add attachment button or click the hyperlink here. Hyperlink's a little bit faster because if I click this here, it defaults the type to power of attorney, where they may actually have to, if they click add attachment, select from a dropdown what they are attaching. Then I'm going to choose file and click on the power of attorney, click OK. Now, one thing to note, just as with the other documents that carriers can upload, we're not doing any actual checks to make sure that this is the power of attorney document. This will need to go through the motor carrier unit to be reviewed, and they're going to verify that this information is actually correct and accurate. If they accidentally upload a picture of their cat, that's what's going to be sent. Now, if they did accidentally upload the wrong thing, they can just click this hyperlink to remove it and then add the right thing if they need to. Then I'm going to click next. And I see a question popping up. So before I actually submit this, we'll wait for that question. Um, and the question is, so will there be a waiting period of approval before access is granted to the service provider? Yes, in terms of however long it takes for motor carrier unit to actually get in and review, because that is something that they're going to have to manually check. And Adam may have some additional information on that. On the signature, I'm going to put the signature here. And I think this was Terry Ray, our signature. Once that has all been taken care of, I will click submit. We'll be given the confirmation number, click OK. So from a system standpoint, what's going to happen is we've now created what's called a case for the motor carrier unit to review. That is going to go into their work to be reviewed. They'll review that information. If everything checks out, they will approve it as soon as they approve it, that customer will now be added to the list of individuals that can be worked, or the carriers that can be worked for the service provider, and that service provider will be listed as a service provider for that customer or that carrier. So as soon as all that's really being waited on for that is the approval that the motor carrier unit would have. So to demonstrate this, if I log off of this customer and I go back to our motor carrier unit, we notice that we do not see them appearing as of yet because on the back end, there hasn't been any approval. And we would still be waiting. But as soon as they are available, they would appear in this list of people of carriers that we could work with as a service provider. Good questions. What other questions do you have about somebody adding service providers or going through that process? Okay, looks like we're good to go. I don't have a lot extra because we talked about the account updates there. I do want to um, go over a couple things and just as some reminders for you all. We have if I go into a customer, if you are updating their information for the IRP, if I go to view supplement, um, notice that we don't have or I don't have anything set up right now, but there is a difference between adding a vehicle and just to open up a supplement and actually submitting that supplement. And the kind of analogy that we've come up with is a if you add a vehicle to an IRP supplement and go through that process, that is like putting the documentation and all of that information into an envelope. The submitting and clicking the submit hyperlink is like putting it into the mailbox so it's actually mailed out. So there's two steps to that. So you're putting everything into the envelope to be mailed. And then once you're actually ready for it to be mailed, meaning you have all your documentation together, you've done everything like that, then we have that submit hyperlink there that you would submit for. Okay. The other thing to make note of is that if you go to the vehicles, you can delete a vehicle and you can delete and then do a transfer. So if you go click delete first, and then I click next, we don't want a refund letter. We'll click next. So we're not getting a refund here. We're going to be transferring this. And then I click submit. Okay. So notice this moves to an inactive status. And if I go to pending, we now have this populated with information that needs to be updated. But because it's pending and in this pending status, right, that is us just putting in the documentation to say, hey, or putting in the notice, I should say, that we are deleting this vehicle, right? And that's what's happening with that. Now, if we go back to the vehicles and click on add new vehicle, we would fill out this information, and I will try and do this real quickly since we covered it in the webinar. Let me get to my info here to make sure I get everything correct. Okay, so 105. Remember, we're doing work on behalf of Midnight Train Trucking. And this is going to be Alabama. We pulled over from the VIN. Also remember that while on this demo, we are showing that we have the gross vehicle weight and the combined vehicle weight, gross vehicle weight, we are not actually going to be pulling those over when we go live because we don't want a mistake to happen where somebody just assumes, or because it's already filled out, they click next as they're rushing through and accidentally mistype, or I shouldn't say mistype, but assume that that is the correct weight, or miss putting in the correct weight. We'll say 70,000 for this. Say yes, it pulls a trailer. I went too fast. Oh, I need a color. Okay. We'll leave these all set to no. We'll say our purchase date was today's pretend day for 100,000. And then I'll click next. Do you currently have a county plate? We'll leave that no. We'll go ahead and use those weights. So here's where we can transfer a license plate. If I click on yes, it's going to ask if I need to also request a plate because, you know, if the plate was damaged or whatever, I could. But now if I go to select license plate, the plate from that deleted vehicle is now available, and that's because it's included in this particular supplement. So I'll click that hyperlink there, and I'm going to be transferring that plate. I'll click next. Now we could add all of the other documentation. We are allowing you to submit without all of the documentation, or I shouldn't say submit, save without all the documentation, because you can come back and add that documentation as needed. So for right now, we'll just click submit, click OK. So now notice we have this pending action for an inactive vehicle, and we have this pending action for a new vehicle that will be added. Okay. And I now am going to be having this fee of 270 because I'm adding the vehicle, and it's going to be taking the plate off of the one and putting it on that other vehicle. And this is also important to note, or like, let's say that you are deleting a vehicle, but you're adding 5 vehicles in the same supplement. That can be done. And if you're transferring that one plate, you will need to select which vehicle that's going. And same thing if like you're deleting 5 vehicles, but you're only transferring the plate from one of those vehicles to a new vehicle, one new vehicle. You'll have 5 plates to select from. You'll need to select the correct plate for that. Okay. Questions about transfers or IRP in general, especially for you as a service provider? Okay, getting a thumbs up, so it looks like we're good. Okay. And then we've talked about view and file returns, but one thing I want to make kind of clear, currently the way it's set up in the system is that this customer midnight train tracking actually has quarters all the way back to 2023, but I didn't add them as a service provider until Q1 of 2024. So they're only seeing the periods that they are, up to date or added for. So not going to see previous periods that you were not the service provider for. Um, so just kind of keep that in mind. So if you're needing that other information, you may have to work with your carrier to get that additional information. I do see a question, looks like being typed. So um, we have that. Okay, and while I'm waiting, if there's that one, oh, they're good. Great. I think the last main kind of caution I would say for you all is, because things look so similar when you're jumping between accounts, I would just say it might be a good idea for you all to double check that you're working on the correct account. And I'm sure you already do that or have similar things, but if I go to Midnight Train Trucking, this is what I'm seeing. If I go to Small Town Trucking, other than like the names and stuff, and like the balances, everything is laid out the same, so just kind of keep that in mind that we do have things that kind of identify what account you're on, but I've caught myself where I've been doing some testing and working with stuff and realizing, oh, I'm actually working with the wrong customer. Okay. And then before I move on to the final thing that I want to cover, do you all have any questions on anything that we've talked about so far? Okay. The last thing, I just want to give a reminder for the using the support ID if you're asked for it. So if you have to call into the motor carrier unit, you're working with somebody, and they ask for what's called the support ID, you can give them this code, and basically what it does is it gives them the reference code so that they can look up what's been going on with your account in the system. And it kind of gives them a step-by-step view of what has been entered and worked with in the system. What this does not do is it does not give them access to your computer. It does not give them access to your website or anything that's been going on with the web. It is strictly within our own system. It is not extending anything outside of that. Um, so an example of this is like if I were the customer, or excuse me, if I were this service provider, and then I went to Midnight Train Trucking, and then I went to View File, Amend Quarterly Returns, clicked on File Now, and then said no, and then said no. Each one of those clicks that I had done, they would see step by step where I had been going. They would see that I had selected no. They would see that I had selected no for cancel license. Then if I were to enter information here, 25891, um, once I had entered that and clicked off of it or tabbed off of it, they would see that that information had been entered. So they're not able to see your mouse movements. They're not able to see anything like that. They're just simply able to see information that was clicked on or entered within the system. Okay. And that can be real helpful if you're running into an issue, something doesn't look right, and they might be double checking and saying, hey, it looks like you entered this information, or it looks like this information, you told me you entered this, but actually it was this, or oh yeah, that is actually an issue. Let's take a look deeper and see if we can figure out what's going on, if that's intended or if there's some other issue going on. Okay. And in order to get your support ID, you would just click on the question mark hyperlink up at the top, or excuse me, question mark icon at the top, view the support ID hyperlink, click that yes button, and there's your support ID code, and they'll be able to work with that. Okay. All right. Um, so like I said, much shorter um, today. We've gone over kind of the overall, what it will look like for service providers and how the view is slightly different than the carriers. However, once you actually click into the carrier that you're working with, it's the exact same as that we covered in the webinar last week. We also kind of went over how to do the registration process. We went over logons, setting those up and managing those logons, answered some questions there, some kind of checks on IRP and IFTA, and then also just the verification or the support ID. What other questions do you all have? We have plenty of time to answer some questions as needed. Okay. Question was asked, can you remind us of the shutdown and startup dates of this change? Yeah. During the in-between, will all IRP and IFTA services be down? So the first part of that, the dates for this, we will be shutting down AMC February 28th, like 11:59, if I remember correctly, in the evening. So that is your last day to get everything entered into AMC. And one thing to remember with that is like we cannot have something open and waiting for information. So everything needs to be submitted, put together, and able to be processed in AMC. Anything that is still considered quote unquote open, that will not be carried over to the new system. Then on March 8th, we will open up the My DMV for IFTA IRP, and that is when you'll be able to be doing work. You all, whoever is the account administrator for your service provider, will be getting an email on how to enter in their or set up their password, set up the account, and then that individual will be able to do create logons, and put everything together there. And then during the in-between, pretty much all IFTA and IRP services will not be available. I know that there are some things for trip and fuel permits that I have not heard any updates about, but my understanding is that yes, there will not the services will be down for during that time. Um, and then for IRP, will the submission for renewal still be the same as the current system within the renewal month? Um, yes, the submission will be relatively the same within the renewal month that is provided. Now, some carriers may have the ability to do early renewals, things like that, but they will still have that renewal period. So an example of that might be this customer here. It's letting them know, hey, they expire February 28th, 2025. But because we are pretending today is January, it is not actually their renewal month. So they would not be able to do the renewal just yet. In regards to trip and fuel permits, they will be up until 11:59:59 March 6th, and will come back up when our system is live on March 8th. Thanks, Paul. Okay. I see some more typing and maybe some more questions, so we'll give it a little bit longer here. Thanks, Adam, giving us a breakdown of everything. So just to kind of read out what Adam put on here. Following up with what I said, the timeline, February 28th, 11:59 AMC will be shut down, 11:59 p.m., I should say. The week after, the motor carrier unit will work the backlog to ensure a smooth conversion. And that means that we're getting all of the information and converting the data over to the new system. March 8th, in the afternoon, Alvin's My DMV for IFTA IRP will be going live, and you'll receive an email for your login. Um, if you want to double check which email we are using for your login, please email alvininterfaces@revenue.alabama.gov, and Adam will confirm that for you. Great. I'm glad to hear that. It's always good to hear that people are excited for the change. Okay. If there's no other questions, I'm going to go ahead and put wrap us up here. So we covered a number of different things in the system specific to service providers. We went over a couple other things that maybe just to be aware of when it comes to like IRP and IFTA. Um, we really appreciate you taking some time and spending that with us to make sure you're prepared. We really appreciate the feedback and anything else you've assisted with on this process. And we look forward to working with you and making sure everything runs smoothly March 8th when we roll out with the new system. Thank you all again. We really appreciate it. Have a great day.